Hey everyone, welcome back to Wicked Deeds. We're your hosts. I'm Brittany.
And I'm John.
And today we're going to be continuing our discussion regarding the disappearance of Craig Frear. We'll be diving into the odd behaviors and red flags he'd been displaying prior to going missing, as well as the state police's investigation and all of the theories that surround this case. So with that being said, today's episode is part 2 of the disappearance of Craig Frear. Last week, we ended the episode by learning that Craig had been acting off in the weeks prior to his disappearance, and his family started to reflect on those little nuances. So we'll start this episode off by diving right into that. But I think before we get into any of the other strange behaviors and red flags Craig was displaying, we're going to first need to tackle one of the biggest questions that came up in last week's episode, and that was, where on earth was Craig going while he wasn't at work? I told you I had the answer to that question, and I'm sure you've been curious to find out. Personally, I think this coincides with Craig acting off in the weeks prior to his disappearance because him essentially quitting his job and lying about it to practically everyone in his life is the biggest behavior change of them all. Now, before we touch on that, I do just want to make it known that really the only place I've seen it discussed or reported regarding where Craig was going during that time was in the Unfound interview. That interview was honestly such a huge resource when researching this case. Now, figuring out what Craig was doing or potentially getting into for, let's call it 1 to 2 months, while he was supposed to be working would likely have been top priority to uncover for both the PI and then the state police when they took over the case, which did finally happen in 2006, approximately 18 months after Craig first disappeared. I don't know exactly who uncovered what in terms of what we're about to discuss in this episode, but based on Veronica's interview, it does appear as though the PI found out a lot in the beginning, but then once state police took over, he kind of stepped out of the way and let them take everything from there.
Which I think is fair, because if we know that local agencies didn't really do much, but he stepped in, the private eye, that is, and gathered all this information, now that you have a larger agency like a state police taking this seriously, taking over the investigation, it's good on him to take the information he's gathered, pass it off to them, and kind of take a back seat, watch what they're doing, maybe keep an eye out, and maybe he may learn something from their investigation that can help further his own personal investigation that he started.
Yeah, definitely.
If he even continues after state police do their thing.
I mean, who knows? I feel like a PI, like if they've uncovered certain things, they might continue to stay in contact with police over time.
Yeah, I think that if I was in the position where I had to hire a PI to do something, and it was something where the police should be doing, but I had no other option besides hiring one, I think I would be satisfied knowing that the PI did their investigation, got to a certain point, and perhaps it was even his work that made the change and forced state police to start looking into this. And then once you actually have a police agency willing to do their due diligence, them take it over. I would be satisfied as the client.
Yeah, absolutely. Me too. But okay, let's get back to the question at hand. Where was Craig going during the times he was supposed to be at work? Well, when I was listening to this interview with Craig's mother, I was convinced that the answer was going to be one of two things. Either this massive revelation of something crazy that would lead investigators down a path in which they might be able to gain more insight into Craig and what might have been going on in his life, or it was going to be totally innocent. And I guess I'd say the answer is kind of in the middle.
I was going to guess that. I think that, with kids that age, they're a little mischievous, but you can't rule out the idea that, could this have been around a girl? Could this have been around soft drugs? Something like that? That would be an easy guess.
Yeah, it would be like the first thing that you would probably go to. Well, from what I've gathered, when Craig wasn't working, he was just hanging out with some of his friends. I know, it's like totally normal teenage stuff, right?
What were they doing?
Well, here's the thing. It's not completely unremarkable because apparently the kids that Craig was hanging out with during this time were not a part of his core group of friends.
So was the kid with the wallet closer to Craig than we first thought?
So it's interesting that you bring that up, and we are going to touch on that in a minute, but let's table it for 1 second and get into a few other things first.
All right.
So we had talked last week about how Craig had a wide swath of friend groups, but the kids he was spending time with when he was supposed to be working weren't the greatest of influences, if you will, which could lead you to believe that Craig was up to something, like John just mentioned, maybe drugs, maybe it had something to do with a girl, who knows? And, you know, this kind of just prompts the question for me, specifically because he's not hanging out with his main group of friends. Was he actually keeping this a secret that he had just completely stopped going to the Price Chopper from his close friends as well? And the answer to that appears to be yes. It seems as though he was keeping this a secret from almost everyone in his life. And even some of the people that he was hanging out with during this time, like I would say maybe about half of them didn't know either. Now, regarding this not so great group of friends, apparently they were the type to get into some trouble. It's unclear exactly what kind of trouble, but they weren't the straight-laced, working to get a full ride to college with a sports scholarship type of kids. So like his main group, that's what it seemed like. They were very much like him, you know, that he had been scouted and recruited to college and, you know, he was really into his sports and all of that. That was like his core group. This other group kind of seemed to be like the type that you would think.
Freaks and geeks.
Yeah, that might be like selling drugs or doing like stuff that maybe you shouldn't be doing at that age. You know, they were a little bit out of the box, a little bit different. That's kind of what I'm trying to get at.
All right. So I'm wondering if, you know, Craig seemed to be doing well in school. Did great on the SATs from what his mom said. Right? Was working a fair bit of time outside of school. Had a lot of pressure with sports. Was this just a thing where he was tired of carrying the weight of expectations?
That is absolutely possible. I think it totally is. But there are a lot of other things that we're going to work through that might make you think otherwise.
All right.
So in terms of if these friends knew Craig was ditching work, we talked about that a minute ago. The police had mentioned that at least 2 of those friends were aware, but I don't know how many he had been supposedly hanging out with during this time. Obviously, the PI tracked people down, the state police tracked people down, but you can't ever guarantee that you've gotten everyone that he was spending time with. You know, they interviewed people, they talked to people in his life. They obviously had this list of a handful, but you can't ever know for sure if it's everybody. But they said that at least 2 of them knew that he was ditching work. And also, if you're curious, it was mentioned that the girl that Craig went to see on the day he went missing, the girlfriend, ex-girlfriend, as we called her, she supposedly was not aware that he was ditching work to go see her instead.
Do we learn any more about her, about how close their relationship was?
Not really, unfortunately.
Was she part of his normal core group of friends, or was she kind of more towards the new group of friends?
I think she was more his core group of friends, but I'm not positive on that.
Okay.
So the one thing that I feel like I want to know after finding out this seemingly innocent thing that he's just like hanging out with friends is, what could he have been doing? What could have been going on in his life that would make him not feel comfortable enough to confide in, at the very least, his best friends? I could see him not wanting to go to his parents about something and just feeling uncomfortable. But the fact that you're also completely cutting your core group of friends off from this information about you too, it feels like there's something going on there that he just did not want them to know.
Well, I think it could be as simple as if this new group of friends that he was hanging out with were, you know, someone that, you know, the stereotypical jock group of friends that he had. Looked down on or made fun of and bullied or just totally clashed with. It could be like, you know, hey, I have this group of friends over here who are my core group. They really would not appreciate, but they really would look down upon me hanging out with these other people. They'd be like, what the hell? So it's better to just not say anything as opposed to bringing attention to it. I guess it's easier to avoid it if you're in that position than it is to say, hey, no, I'm going to hang out with so-and-so. And then they'd be like, you going to hang out with who?
Yeah.
For what?
Yeah.
Because then word would spread more too.
Be like, oh, Craig's hanging out with
and stuff like that. Right.
Yeah. So. Well, so as you were just saying that, I'm sitting over here like smirking to myself because I'm like, ooh, I have the best example for this. And I think it popped into my head because we watched Drew Gooden's video the other day about this, but it kind of reminded me of High School Musical. So like how Troy couldn't do two things at once. He couldn't be a theater kid and a basketball star.
Yeah.
He could only be one.
I mean, to break it down to something simple like that.
Yeah, and anybody listening that's a millennial, like obviously I'm sure you guys all know High School Musical. I feel like that's a good way to put it. Like,
I agree.
You know, they might be like, oh my God, they're weird. But then if you got to know them, they'd probably be like, oh, these people are cool. And that's what Craig seemed like.
Yep.
You know, he wasn't judging people based on their outside appearance or the things that they were into. He was just friends with them to be friends with them because he liked them.
Right. I mean, I can think back to my time in this era.
Yeah.
Being in high school. I had I guess you would say, core group of friends that you were good with them as long as you were in with them.
Yeah.
But the second you're not in with them, they throw jabs at you. They do this, they do that. And that's not really how I am.
Yeah.
So
this is what I meant about like seeing these similarities between you guys.
Yeah. So like when I played hockey, some of those people were a part of that group where, you know, talk shit about anybody that's not on the in group, where I just kind of, you know, hung out with them because we played the sport together and we built a friendship through that.
But you also had so many different interests. Like, yeah, you like sports, but you also like video games. And those are like two very different things.
Which is why I kind of think of myself as like a chameleon when it comes to like putting me into social situations. I can talk to and start a conversation, or at least join a conversation with a wide swath of people because I have
knowledge in so many different things.
Yeah, but I also don't care like being seen with a quote unquote weirdo as opposed to being seen with, you know, a prim and proper person or something. You know, so
I totally know what you mean.
Yeah, I can understand why he would want to keep it from people, because then he'll get his balls busted too if he's like, no, I'm hanging out with, you know, the freaks and geeks over here. Because I don't feel the social pressure of, you know, being this person that I have to be around you guys. I could just be myself over here.
Yeah, so I think that's what I meant about, you know, when I was listening to this interview and I felt like it could go either way.
Yeah.
Is it totally innocent and he's just hanging out with these people because he now has the time because he was like, screw the price chopper, I'm done with that. Like, I want to be able to just have this pressure off my shoulders. Or was there something going on with this other group of kids? And it could really be either group, the core group or the other group. And was he getting into something with them that he shouldn't have been? Was he, you know, kind of on the outs with his other friends, even though it doesn't really seem like that based on interviews and stuff? But still, it could literally be totally nothing, or it could be this deeper meaning.
Yeah, I think if I had to guess, like not knowing as much as you know now, and maybe there is more to this new group of friends and the stuff that they're into, but I would say it's probably more of the innocent thing. It's like, I'm tired of having to be this person that's put in this box.
Yeah.
I see these people over here that don't care as much. I want to go hang with them.
Yeah.
And just be myself for a little while and not worry about anything.
I mean, it's a fair assumption. All right, so John had just asked a few minutes ago about the wallet kid, as I'm going to call him, and if he was like, what, a part of this group or in the know about the whole thing with the job,
or at least, at least closer to Craig than we first believed.
So I don't actually think so. It was stated that he wasn't someone that Craig was spending a ton of time with. However, from what I can tell, authorities did find out that he'd been with Wallet Kid at least once when he was skipping work. And based on the very convoluted and confusing story about the wallet, if it's true, I would think that that's likely when Craig would have lost his wallet or left it in his car. So overall, it really doesn't seem like Craig hung out with that guy all that often.
All right.
But I think the number one question here, now that we know where Craig was going when he was ditching work, is why? Why is he hanging out with this group of people during this time? Why would he just stop going to a job that he liked, a job where he'd done well, a job that was flexible and worked around all the things he had to do outside of it, a place where he'd worked up the ranks and gotten himself into a department that he enjoyed working in? Why is like the biggest question for me with like this whole situation.
Yeah, I think it's a fairly big question for me too. But I'm wondering if you're getting into this because you have more information as to why.
Oh, I have so many bits of information.
All right, let's continue then.
Yeah, we'll keep going. So very briefly last week, I had brought up the fact that Craig seemed to get very friendly with the truckers at the dairy truck loading area at the Price Chopper. And there's been a lot of speculation surrounding this aspect of the case, and a theory about what might have been going on kind of sits with the Price Chopper. And there's also this story that Veronica brought up that I wanted to touch on now that has to do with, I guess you would call it, something that happened to Craig while he was at work, and I believe it did take place when he was working in the dairy department. According to Veronica's interview with the Unfound podcast, there had been a time when Craig came home from work and he was all proud and happy with himself because he'd received a woman's phone number while at work. And I say woman because I guess he told his mom that it was an older woman who gave him her phone number.
Interesting.
Yeah. And
interesting to be like super proud about that.
Yeah. I mean,
I get it like if you're trying to like pull a cougar. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I guess.
But it's just a weird thing for him to come home and be like, I got an older lady's number.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking too. And I think it does have to do with the dairy department. I'm not 100% sure like if this person worked there or if they were one of the truckers or something. Mm-hmm. Not totally sure on that. But either way, Veronica was like, don't you think that's like really inappropriate? This is an older woman. You're a 17-year-old boy.
Right.
I'm not cool with this. And of course, Craig was probably like, oh, come on, Mom. Don't worry about it.
Yeah.
But from what I could tell, Veronica just wasn't really a big fan of the situation. But that's not even the part of the story that stood out to me. What stood out is a comment Veronica made about the handwriting on the little like piece of paper that he was given. You know, he like came in, he had the piece of paper and he's like, oh, look what I have. Yeah. So she said that she felt as though the handwriting looked like it could have belonged to a man. Which I know we're still in the early stages of this episode and we're kind of discussing things a little backwards with this case, but this kind of brings me to a theory that's been brought up. We'll discuss it in more detail later on, but it was one of those things that I wanted to touch on and kind of let sit in the back of your mind so you can think it over as we work through everything else that there is to dissect in this case. The question is, could Craig have been gay or unsure of his sexuality, and while at work, he met one of these truckers, and something happened with them that made Craig not want to continue working at the Price Chopper? And before you say, Brittany, what the heck? This is totally out of left field. What type of evidence do you have to even support this theory? Just know that this was never anything that I thought up. This was something that Veronica herself brought up in the interview, and she mentioned that the PI that she had hired had suggested it as a potential reason for Craig going missing.
You know, your whole, Brittany, what are you talking about? This whole thing came out of left field. Are not my thoughts.
Okay, I just felt like all of a sudden I'm like, hey, no one's touched on this at all, and now I'm just like throwing this in your face.
No, I mean, it's not something that I would balk at and be like, oh my God, really? That's where you're going with this?
Yeah.
I think like, you know, working through an investigation and using that investigative mindset, you really don't rule anything out until there's a good reason to, or unless it's just totally outlandish, which this is not. I mean, we're talking 2004, 2005, 2006 time frame. This is a kid that is a jock who's popular with a bunch of different ladies. Mm-hmm. Could that be a front because he is battling with something inside where, you know, maybe he is gay? Mm-hmm. And in order to fight that on like the outset for everybody to see, he's hooking up with all these girls. Like, oh no, I'm not gay. I'm having, you know, a relationship with this girl and this girl and this girl.
Yeah.
When in actuality, he's not being true to himself. I wouldn't say that that's totally impossible.
Yeah, and I agree with that. And I just think this goes back to what we were just talking about a few minutes ago about hanging out with his core group of friends versus this new group and feeling like he can be more like himself. And, you know, it doesn't necessarily have to be that these new friends knew anything about his sexuality, but maybe it was just something that happened at the Price Chopper. He felt embarrassed about it. And then, you know, he was just going through this stuff and maybe didn't want to be around his friends because maybe they would notice that something was off, that kind of thing. So I think a lot of these things coincide. And that's why I wanted to bring it up now so that you can think on it with everything else that we're going to discuss.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's fair. And I think that if, you know, maybe he had feelings that he was gay, but always kind of like pushed him to the back burner.
Yeah.
Right. And then something may have happened at work with one of these truckers or with whoever. And he was like not ready for that. He actually liked what was happening or appreciated whatever type of relationship he was building with this person, if it did happen. And he was like, no, I can't do this. Like, this is not me. I'm not going to do it. And just was in denial. And that's why he like didn't want to face this person at work or wanted to get out of work because he didn't want, you know, anybody to see him around this person, or he didn't want something like that to happen again and then somebody see. I mean, I think it's totally fair to believe that.
Yeah, I agree. But now that you have that information in the back of your head, take some time to think on it, and we're going to move on to some of the other strange behaviors and red flags that Craig was displaying. So this next odd behavior is something that actually stuck out to me while I was researching this case, and I haven't really seen too many people talk about it. But roughly 11 years ago, Craig's family had posted a video to YouTube regarding their son and his disappearance. And in it, there's footage of Craig at prom, which had taken place only about a month or so prior to his disappearance. So, John, I'm going to send you a link to the YouTube video. And for all of our listeners, a link will be on our website, wickeddeedspodcast.com. Yeah, so you really don't even need sound or anything. What I want you to focus on while you're watching this is how Craig looks in this footage.
He looks stiff. That's my first inkling. Obviously, like, now that I have this idea in the back of my mind, I'm looking for stuff. But to me, like, he doesn't have his arm around her. He's not, like, lovey-dovey with her. And if he's this player that, you know, has all these girls and he's been dating all these girls, you would think that he would have his arm around her. He would look happy. He looks, like, stiff and awkward. Yeah,
I mean, even without knowing the potential of him, you know, maybe being interested in men, I think in general, just seeing his face, and this is something that I really resonated with because I'm a very anxious person, and I feel like when I'm in a situation where I'm feeling like I can't get out of my own head, that my thoughts are just completely taking over, I can't hide that from my face. It shows on my face, and I have a hard time focusing on what's going on in the moment, and I feel like I could see that in him. Like, he was just not interested in what was going on, and he just seemed like his mind was totally elsewhere. Even, like, take out everything with his sexuality, just think about, like, just, it's the look in his eyes that really got me, because it just reminded me of how I feel in situations where my thoughts are just completely at the forefront.
Yeah, he looks awkward and out of place.
Yeah, he just didn't look comfortable to me, and it was something that just really stood out, and I felt like I couldn't not bring it up because it's just, it's just my interpretation of it and just how I felt. And this was actually one of the very first videos that I even watched when I started researching this case, and I instantly, like, resonated with that feeling he seemed to have, where his mind was just somewhere else and he couldn't stop thinking about whatever was going on in his head rather than enjoying his junior prom.
Right. And I mean, you look at the difference between his face and the girl that he's with's face.
Yeah.
She's happy. She's smiling. It still seems like strange. Not that you have to go with, like, somebody that you've been in a relationship with to prom.
Yeah.
But you would think that if he's had these relationships with all these girls, he would go with somebody that he's relatively friendly with or has had a good relationship with or whatever. And it just looks like they don't have any type of relationship together, don't even have a friendship together. It's almost like they both got put together to take a picture.
Yeah, it's strange. It was something that, it was something that just totally stood out to me. And I was like, his head's somewhere else right now.
Yeah.
He is not, you know, focusing on how exciting it is. Like, this is his junior prom. He's about to go into his senior year. This is an exciting time. And it really seemed like he had something going on in his head at that time.
Yeah, I can totally agree with that.
All right. So moving along now, the next 3 things we're going to discuss are, yet again, little nuances in Craig's behavior that were brought up by Veronica during her interview with Unfound. Like I mentioned last week, there were a lot of things brought up in that discussion that really haven't been reported anywhere else. And like I said before, John and I know from firsthand experience that when you talk to a loved one or a victim's advocate, you tend to learn a lot more than you would by just reading just normal news articles that are reporting on the situation. But there were 3 things that Veronica brought up that took place. The first being a situation with CD rentals, the second regarding an internship Craig participated in, and the third was a soccer party.
CD rentals?
Yeah, so that was the first one that I was going to bring up. So at some point prior to Craig's disappearance, he'd supposedly taken out a couple of CDs in his brother's name. Now, when I first heard about this, I was like, all right, where are we renting CDs from? Is this like a library?
That's exactly what I was thinking. That's like the only place I would ever rent out CDs.
I wanted to ask you that. I'm like, you've got to know, because I was too young in 2004.
Okay, well, just by me being like, CD rental?
Yeah.
Should already say that it's pretty weird. Like,
yeah.
Oh, movie rental, DVD rental, video game rental. Okay, totally understand all that. But CD rental? The only place I can imagine is a library.
Okay, all right. I'm glad that you feel the same way then. But I guess Craig just never returned the CDs. And of course, they're taken out in his brother's name. And so he's like, bro, I can't take any CDs out or whatever else for myself now because you did. This is stupid. Go return them.
What were the CDs? Do we know?
No idea. So when I first heard about this, I was like, I don't really know how much of a red flag this is. And Veronica was very open and honest during her conversation with Unfound, and she mentioned that this could totally be her overthinking things when it came to Craig's behavior. But once you lump it in with everything else, there is always the potential that it could mean something, especially considering the fact that he appeared to be a pretty responsible kid. Like, why is he taking him out in his brother's name in the first place?
Well, he seems like a pretty responsible kid, yet he can never keep his wallet in his pocket.
I know, it's so true.
So,
but then again,
I mean, I don't know.
17-year-olds do dumb shit. But
I totally agree. But, I mean, if he didn't have his wallet, how could he take it out in his brother's name? Like, if he took it out in his brother's name without a card, like a library card available, couldn't he have done the same thing in his own name?
Yeah, I mean, maybe his brother did it for him, and then he just never returned them, and maybe that was the problem. And he's like, hello, dude, I did this for you. I did this favor, and now you didn't return them or something. Yeah. Who knows? But
when something like this happens and somebody disappears, like, you cling to anything.
Oh, for sure.
And potentially overthink.
Yes.
And turn something that is, a molehill into a mountain, as opposed to the inverse.
Yes, and I loved that Veronica was honest about that. She's like, I know this could totally be me being this way, but these are things that I just have to mention because they stick out in my head.
That's the best way you can be when working with a private investigator, working with police, working with anybody.
Yep.
Never feel like you shouldn't come forward with information, because anything that you think could be something is worth listening to.
Definitely.
Because even if it doesn't give you, a direct line to another piece of evidence, it's something that you can work off of.
Definitely. All right, so the next red flag had to do with an internship that Craig participated in during his junior year at Scotia Glenville High. We'd talked last episode about how Craig had been interested in elementary education and aspired to become a teacher. And the internship that he landed was as a teaching assistant. And I guess he'd done really well with it, and by the end of the year, he had one final big assignment to turn in for it, and he just never turned it in.
Was this around the same time we started hanging out with this other group of friends?
I'm not sure if they hadn't been friends before, or if he had just started hanging out with them once he stopped going to the Price Chopper, but...
Well, if you think about it, right? School is school, right? So generally the end of the school year, whether it's high school or elementary school, most of the time it's usually like May, June.
Yep.
So if he stopped working at the Price Chopper about 5 to 6 weeks prior to his disappearance, that puts it in the same time frame of maybe not caring about doing his work for the internship.
Yeah.
If it's due at the end of the school year, and we know that he went missing in June, and 5 to 6 weeks prior to that, he stopped working at the Price Chopper.
Yep. I mean,
that's what timeline adds up.
Yeah, and that's what I'm saying about the whole thing, like the prom video, him seeming off, the whole thing with the job, now this thing with the internship. The timeline is making sense of something going on.
Maybe something traumatic happened in this general time frame, maybe 2 months prior to his disappearance.
Exactly, yeah. So back to the whole, not turning in the final project. At the time, his mom was like, all right, what are you doing? This is ridiculous. Turn this in. I don't understand why you're being, like this. It doesn't make sense. You're a good kid and you always do your homework, blah, blah, blah. And again, this is one of those things. When it happened, she didn't think too much about it. She probably figured, he's being a typical teen. He's dragging his feet. It's the end of the school year, But now it's...
Summer's in the forefront. He's thinking, it's almost summertime. I don't have to worry about school from there. I'm already checked out.
Yes, definitely.
It's like senioritis, but junioritis.
It's so true. I had junioritis big time, more than I did senioritis.
I had all school yearitis.
Yeah, this is true. But again, it's one of those situations for Veronica where hindsight is 20/20. In the moment you're like, he's just being ridiculous. And, I can't believe he wouldn't turn in this project. But now that her son goes missing, she's like, oh my God, this is a red flag. This is a big deal. Did I miss something? Now, the last behavior change had to do with a soccer banquet that Craig attended at the end of his junior year. And during that banquet is actually when Craig was told he was going to be named captain of the varsity soccer team for the following school year. And just based on everything we've discussed about Craig so far, we know that he was a super social guy and was always down to go out and hang with his friends. And the night of this banquet, all of Craig's friends were going out after for like a little after party. And instead of going to hang with his buddies, he made the decision to stay home instead. And his mom had talked to him and she was like, no, you don't need to stay home. It's okay. Go out with your friends, have fun. And he just seemed totally adamant. Nope, I want to go home. And again, I think it's another one of those scenarios where in the moment, Veronica's like, okay, that's weird, but maybe he's just not feeling good. Maybe he's tired. But now looking back, it's just another one of those red flags where it's like, this was not like my son. Why is he acting this way? And when you look at it all happening in this close proximity of time too, it definitely starts to stand out. And they're all just these, it's like this cluster of red flags.
Now, I have to assume that with a private eye looking into this and state police looking into this, they probably asked this question and they probably interviewed any people that would have fallen into this category. But for me, when you have the idea of maybe some type of thing happening at work with one of the truckers or another employee, and maybe Craig wasn't ready to come out to his friends group and his family and stuff like that, I'm thinking, is it a possibility that somebody on the soccer team saw what happened at the Price Chopper? One of his core group of friends who also worked at the Price Chopper caught wind of it. Is that a possibility why he would want to distance himself from that friend group and then go to this other group of friends where they don't know anything about it? And, you know, maybe this person wasn't willing to oust him, but he also didn't want to face that person and have to answer any questions that they may have had about what they saw.
It's possible. I know nothing about it, though. Like, it's one of those things that I just am not sure about.
Yeah, that's just something that pops into my head.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's fair.
Because if you have, you know, a whole group of soccer players going out after this banquet, and it's not like Craig to not go out and he chooses to go home instead. He's not just trying to avoid his friend group or not just trying to go out. It's like he's trying to avoid the entire soccer team. Could it have been somebody that played soccer but wasn't in either of his friends group or wasn't the type of person to throw him under the bus? But like I said, he didn't want to face them and then answer any questions or whatever to that person that may have seen something.
Yeah, and again, you can look at this through the lens of his sexuality, but you can also look at it through another lens of just what if he had gotten himself into trouble and
somebody knew something about it and he didn't want to face them in that respect.
Exactly. It can go either way, but I think overall, at least based on what we know so far, he had something going on.
Yeah.
There wasn't just everything normal and then all of a sudden he just vanishes off the face of the earth. Right. That there was something that led up to this, I feel like.
I agree with that. And my gut instinct is saying that somebody either saw it or caught wind of it and he was trying to avoid them.
Yeah, no,
Seems like he's
agree.
trying to avoid somebody that might know something.
It
whether
makes
it be
sense.
about the sexuality, whether it be about something getting in trouble, whether it be whatever. He's clearly avoiding contact with either a group of friends or a group of teammates.
Yeah, I agree.
Or what if it's a coach or something like that too? You never know. It seems like he is avoiding someone.
Yes, that I think at the end of the day is what we both agree on, is what it seems like based on the information presented so far.
Yeah. Why is he doing it? Still up in the air.
Absolutely. Now, Veronica struggled with the unknown when it came to all of these potential red flags that she's reflected on over the years. And at one point, she told the Times-Union, quote, "The nights are the worst. Your mind starts going and you can't shut it down. You keep thinking, what could I have done? I feel like I failed him. Something was going on and I just didn't see everything. The police keep saying, Veronica, he's a 17-year-old young man. Teenagers aren't open with their parents about everything. But those are the thoughts that keep you up at night." End quote.
Yeah, I mean, I don't even want to imagine being in that position.
No, it's
but
horrible.
I understand what she's saying. I noticed in the video from prom, or whatever video that was that you sent me, it looked like, I think, his brother talking.
Yes.
Did his siblings ever open up about anything that they thought were like red flags, or did you only gain that information because of the interview with Veronica on the Unfound podcast?
Yeah, so a lot of it was pretty much just from Veronica. Matthew has been, so steadfast in trying to help find his brother.
But didn't really have information as to what may have changed or what may have prompted this change.
Not in your basic reporting. That's the thing. And I bet if he had been interviewed, he might have had more things to say. And for all we know, there are things that the family has told reporters and stuff like that that just hasn't made it into a video or made it into an article. And,
or told authorities. I feel like anything that gets told to reporters, whether it be fact or fiction, usually ends up making its way in, because if it's something juicy that they could write in an article, they're going to throw it in there. But if it's something that's put to authorities and they're not giving all their information out to the news companies or whatever, who knows, something could have been said by one of the siblings that maybe is the lead that they're working now.
Yeah, definitely. Now, before we move on to the state police investigation and all that was done and uncovered after they took over in 2006, I do just want to mention two other things. One is something that was brought up briefly in the reporting done by WNYT, and that had to do with the fact that Craig was found to have been using and selling small amounts of marijuana. But if I'm honest, to me, that just seems like your typical 17-year-old boy behavior, unless he'd gotten himself into hot water or in with the wrong type of people. I mean, I don't really see that being what was going on, and authorities haven't really said that they've uncovered anything that has led them down that path either.
Yeah, I wouldn't think so either. I mean, unless he crossed paths with like an absolute nut job that is willing to kill somebody over, an eighth of weed or, an ounce of weed.
Yeah.
I doubt it.
Or unless he got in with some big wig who had like this big operation, but I doubt that.
Right. I mean, you'd be grasping at straws. You'd have to, if you're trying to build that case, then you'd be like, oh, well, maybe he met a trucker, and this trucker on their off time didn't just deliver for the dairy department at this place. They drove, other trucks for a cartel and blah, blah, blah. Like, that's just crazy to start thinking about.
Yeah.
But
that's tinfoil hat shit right there.
Right, where you have no basis to believe that.
Exactly.
But I would say, he's probably like a lot of kids at that time where, they bought a little bit of weed, sold a little bit, smoked a little bit. That way they could smoke for free.
Exactly. Yeah, makes perfect sense. Now, this next thing has to do with a phone call that someone overheard Craig on at a graduation party, literally the day before he went missing.
Did he have a cell phone now?
No. So this graduation party was for an ex-girlfriend of Craig's, but it's unclear if it's the same girlfriend, ex-girlfriend from the apartment or if it was another altogether. That I haven't nailed down. But regardless, according to Veronica's interview, Craig had been at a graduation party for a friend and was overheard on the phone. Now, I don't know if he used the home phone at this location where the party was or if he borrowed someone's cell phone, but either way, the way Craig was acting while on this phone call was very strange. But before we dive into the details, I do just want to make it known that Veronica supposedly did not learn about this phone call until years and years down the line. From what I remember, she'd only learned of it just months prior to her participating in this interview with Unfound. So that was 2017.
Oh, yeah, that's, 13 years later, essentially?
Yeah. And I guess this person came forward and specifically told Veronica about this phone call when she saw her in a nail salon one day, and she just felt compelled to tell her about this thing that she'd known for all these years. So I don't know if it was like she just never went to authorities about it, or if maybe she went to authorities and thought the family knew. I'm not sure what the whole thing was, but from how I've interpreted it, this woman had been roughly around the same age as Craig, so obviously she was a teenager back in 2004, and she was friendly with whoever's graduation party this was, and she had overheard Craig on this phone call. And Craig had, I guess, essentially separated himself from the party, and he was off in another area while everyone else was hanging out and celebrating. And somehow this girl had wound up in the same general area where Craig was while he was on the phone, but she claims that Craig never saw her while he was having this conversation. But what she had to say about his behavior and the things he said are pretty wild. So she claimed that he was saying things like, I can't believe you're doing this to me right now. I can't believe you're going to do this to me. And he was acting very strange. He seemed anxious. He was even pacing a little bit during this call. And it seemed like he knew this person on the other end of the line, and they were potentially threatening him with something. Now, after this information was found out, Veronica did mention that they tried to locate the person that Craig had been speaking to on the phone that day. But due to how long it had been, there was no way to track down those records to indicate who he had spoken to.
So I have a couple questions.
I figured you would.
My first question is, how close to his disappearance did this graduation party take place?
Day before.
The day before?
The day before.
Okay. So now you can only assume that the person on the other line knew something and was going to oust him for what was going on.
Yes, which when you were just mentioning that 5 minutes ago, I was like, he might change his opinion in a minute.
Right.
So.
And he was like, I can't believe this. And, whatever happened the next day when he disappeared, maybe he had built a good relationship with this girlfriend, ex-girlfriend that lived at the Cambridge Manor apartments and kind of went to see her, maybe not to say goodbye or whatever. Maybe he felt as though he could confide in her and she wouldn't, spill all the beans, because at first, when Veronica called, she didn't spill any beans.
Yeah, she lied for him.
Then she just gave him a little bit, but then, he disappeared after that.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering if this is on my lower end of the spectrum, if somebody was going to come after him for something that happened, but more likely, I feel like somebody was going to rat on him for something, whether it be something criminally he did, whether it be something with his sexuality that may have happened, whether it be something he just didn't want people to know.
Yeah, and it could have been something so innocent that, like, at 17, you think it's going to ruin
World
your
ending.
life. Yeah,
Right.
but in reality, it could be just nothing in,
The grand scheme
of things. Yeah,
Right.
so that's what's tough. And I did want to bring up that the host of Unfound made a really good point. So Craig was at this party where the majority of his main friend group was. So who was it on the other end of the line? It's not someone from the core group of friends. And apparently the kids from that other group that he would hang out with wouldn't have attended this graduation party because they were not friends. So
do you think that he could have started to hang out with this other group of friends to befriend them and to keep them quiet, as
I don't
opposed
know.
to, going to hang out with them, to let loose a little bit?
I mean, I think that's fair to say and to think, but I also just keep going back to the price chopper because I think that's where everything stems from in this case. Because why would he stop going there? Because it would have been so much harder to make money.
I think the real crux of the question with the price chopper has to do with coming home with the note.
Yes, so that's what I was going to say.
The
Was
number
that who he was
and
talking
stuff like
to?
that. Right. I mean, I think that you're in the ballpark saying that the big question is what was going on at the price chopper.
Definitely.
To make him not want to go work there anymore, to make him not care about his studies and his internship, to make him change his normal routine of hanging out with his main group of friends to go hang out with this other group of friends.
Yeah. But I also think that it could just be, again, I just keep using this word innocent, but it could be innocent that he wasn't hanging out with his main group of friends as much anymore, because for all we know, maybe he got in a fight with someone, or like he had just like some sort of beef, and then it's just coinciding what goes with what's going on at the price chopper.
I don't know. I feel like more people would know about that beef and would have came forward about it.
This is true, yeah, but who knows what just hasn't been reported by police and what they've told these people to not say publicly.
I mean, I think that with the lack of due diligence by police in the early stages of the investigation, coupled with the family really wanting to know and them hiring a private investigator and him interviewing everybody, he would have uncovered that there was some type of beef, and that's why Craig was no longer hanging out with that group of friends.
Yeah.
And he could have figured out that it was totally, childish as to what the beef was over.
Yeah.
I think this was more something that Craig internally did not want anybody to know about, and somebody knew something.
And now this phone
worried.
call is
Right.
making sense, and he's like, oh my God, someone's going to out me for whatever this is.
Yeah.
And
they're going to go to police about something that I did, or they're going to tell my family or my friends about, this relationship or this brief moment that I had with somebody at the price chopper or whatever. It's something that he was clearly super upset about other people knowing.
Yeah.
Or it seems that way anyway. Obviously, you can't say that clearly this is what it was.
Yeah.
But it seems as though his actions would indicate that he was worried about somebody saying something or spilling the beans about something that he did not want anybody to know about.
Yeah. And I think we have to take that too, because we're talking about this so much, but we're not lumping it into where is he?
Right. That's the question.
Did he leave because of this and just never come back? I don't know. Did somebody
Is there anybody
get angry with him and he was killed? I mean, we have to think about that too, because at the end of the day, like, that's what we're going to get to when we get to theories. Sure, all of these things could happen, but what stemmed from that for him to go missing?
Right. I agree with that question, and it is something that does not stand in your forefront when you're talking about all these other things that could have gone wrong in this kid's life before he disappeared. But where is he now?
Yes.
That's the real question. And why do we not know where he is now? Is it because of his own choice, or is it because something happened to him?
Yeah.
Now, I think that a lot of the questions that I'm asking, I would assume that a private investigator or the state police and, their investigators or detectives would have asked. But, was there anybody else that was working at the price chopper for any period of time that no longer worked there in the time where he went missing?
Yeah, so that's an interesting question, and I think...
Particularly maybe a trucker.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing that's tough, though, is you probably have a plethora of truckers coming in and out of a place like that, because you have people who get sent on different routes all the time. They could be like, no, you're actually going to go here instead today. So he could have encountered someone like twice, and then they never even knew that they were there. So it could be like this thing where you might never figure out who was there and then not there again.
I think it really comes down to record keeping and knowing people's routes. And if that wasn't being well kept, I could understand why that wouldn't be able to be figured out.
Yeah.
Unless somebody came forward with, firsthand knowledge of the situation. But I think that if there are records that were kept and there are ways to go about investigating that, that is a huge piece that needs to be looked into. I think that if we believe, and maybe if investigators believe, that something happened at that price chopper, you need to look through who was there around that time and who was no longer there in the short time before or after his disappearance.
But then, it could also be someone who's like, I'm going to stand my ground so no one looks at me and I'm not going to act weird.
I was going to say that too, that you could go through that whole rigmarole of looking through that, but then this person is totally steadfast and stoic, and they're like, no, I'm not going to say anything. I'm not going to act any different. I am a sociopath, a psychopath, whatever. And you'll never get anything out of me because I can live this lie. And I can just shut everything off.
Yeah, so that's where it's hard. And that's where, like, a lot of times I struggle. Actually, it's not a lot of times. I always struggle with the missing persons cases. And, like, this is absolutely boggling my mind, this case. I do not know what to think half the time.
Yeah, I think that oftentimes in the missing persons cases that we cover, where, there are indicators that make you believe that maybe something nefarious happened.
Like Sherry Magaro, it's the perfect example.
Right. But then there's those cases where you're like, was this person trying to run away from what they thought they might be ousted for? Did they have a mental break? Did they just want to start a new life?
Or were they killed for knowing something? Or were they trying to just hide out for a little while and then something bad happened because they got into a car with the wrong person? Or, like, you don't know.
Yeah, I think that in this particular case, and I'm sure we have a little bit more to go through.
Oh, yeah.
I think that my gut feeling right now, I don't think that, it's a very slim chance that Craig got in the car with a serial killer.
Yeah, I agree.
While trying to escape his life.
Yeah.
Right? So, like, for me, that's totally off the table. He didn't meet the wrong person that killed him.
Well,
if that were to happen.
Well, that's not exactly what I'm getting at. So maybe I posed this in the wrong way. But, like, everyone had mentioned that based on where he was supposedly walking, he could have got into very populated or, areas of the town where people would go often, and maybe he had met up with a friend or someone he knew not that well, but
like a casual acquaintance or something.
Yeah, and got in the car with them and was like, oh, just take me to so-and-so's house. I can't even deal with this with my parents right now. And then something transpired from there, not just, oh, he got into a car and unfortunately met the worst serial killer that Scotia, New York has ever seen. That's not, I wouldn't
Scotia, New York knows nothing about.
Exactly. So I think it would be more along the lines of maybe he just got into this bad situation, and it could be like a Simone Reidinger case. And whoever he was
involved in that situation with.
Yes.
Did
what
something?
If it just has nothing to do with anything else that was going on in his life, and he gets in the car with this person who he thinks he's friends with. They go, they hang out, they start smoking weed and drinking and doing whatever because he's having a bad day. And like something happens, and then everyone's like, shit, we need to cover this up. Could be something like that too. So that's where I feel like I have such a hard time with this case, but we're going to tackle so much more of this when we get to theories, and we're just going to keep rambling on, I'm sure. So let's move on to the state police's investigation after they took over in 2006.
All right, let's do that.
All right. So we know that much hadn't been done, if anything, by the Scotia PD, and any information that the family was able to uncover had been found out by the PI and also their personal and community efforts in trying to find Craig. But once the state police took over, an investigator with the Major Crimes Unit, Gloria Coppola, took the lead, and she held on to and worked the case for 9 years, from 2006 to 2015 when she retired. And then after Detective Coppola retired in 2015, the case was transferred to another investigator with the Major Crimes Unit, Kevin Noto, and he's been working it ever since. Both investigators were and are incredibly dedicated to this case and have done all they could to try and find Craig. So, as with most of the investigations we cover on this show, let's review the different categories of the investigation. We'll start with witness statements and sightings of Craig, and then we'll move on to all of the searches that have taken place over the years, and then finally, we'll talk about what police have deduced as a possible option of what they believe could have happened to Craig back in June of 2004.
Okay, so we're going to kind of backtrack, come around, and reframe everything from an investigator's point of view.
Yeah, that's what I meant when I said we're kind of going backwards with this case.
Mm-hmm.
So the big thing was putting this together in a way where you're going to know certain things at almost essentially the right time, I think, so that you can kind of mull them over while we talk through stuff. Because if I had brought up the things that I've talked to you about already in this episode, I think you would be kind of lost by the time we get to the end of it. Like, we ended last week's episode with talking about the fact that he had odd behaviors before he left. And then if we just jumped into the investigation and kind of ignored that, I think it would be a little disjointed and all over the place. So there are certain things that I want you to know, but then, you know, I want to keep some stuff from you to kind of see what you're getting from this information without knowing too much as well.
Yeah, and I think it's a fine line between revisiting a topic and rambling about a topic.
Yeah.
And I would like our listeners to reach out and let us know, you know, we never want to ramble on something for so long, but we do want to be able to revisit things that are important to something, and something that we may have said in a part 1 or early on in an episode, or something that was maybe innocuous when we first talked about it. And now that we've learned a little bit more, now we're like, wait, you said this before. Now when you put, you know, 1 and 1 together, I'm getting to 2, and this is really weird. So let's talk about this for a second.
Yeah, for example, the truckers.
Right.
If I didn't bring the truckers up until probably towards the end of this episode, I would assume almost like 2 hours in, you know, it would be like, oh my God, that was like 4 hours ago, essentially, in the span of listening to these episodes.
That we learned about the friendship with the truckers.
Yeah, like you would be totally like, oh my God, I barely even remember that. I've talked about so much. So there are certain things that I try and frame for you, you know, in a certain way, so it's easier to kind of digest the story. And also how I digest the story too when I'm researching and learning about it.
Yeah, and also, I mean, it's not just digesting a story, because there is no known conclusion to a lot of the cases that we cover.
Yeah.
Most of the cases that we cover. It's, you know, we're reiterating these things because we're hoping to get to the right people, and that they hear something, or somebody that may have known about this case hears something that they didn't think of before, or whatever. And hopefully, you know, it starts a dialogue and you get to somebody that can provide something of value to investigators and maybe break this thing wide open.
Yeah.
So I think that it's important to not just gloss over facts, but if we need to talk about them again a second time or revisit them or whatever, because that's what you do from an investigative standpoint.
Yep.
You interview people, you learn information, then you interview new people, you gain more information, then that other information that you just learned may make you want to go back and talk to this other person again, because
and
now you have something else.
Said.
Right. Yes. So that's the way an investigation works.
Yeah.
It's not always linear.
Yeah.
A lot of times there's jumping around, talking to different people, learning information, and then bringing that information back to something that you have already learned before.
Yes, and that is
what you're trying to do.
Yeah.
And you do a great job at it.
Oh, thank you. All right. So within the first 5 years of the state police's investigation, from 2006 to 2011, they'd interviewed over 500 people and have worked upwards of 450 leads. Now, in terms of those interviews and the people authorities have talked to, they have stated that most have been totally cooperative with their investigation, but there are a handful of people who haven't been overly cooperative. Of course, it's completely unclear exactly who those people are, but I will say, especially since John brought this up a few minutes ago, actually it's probably more than a few minutes ago now, but he was asking about the girlfriend, ex-girlfriend, and there is so much speculation online about that girl and her mother. It's ridiculous.
Like bad speculation?
Bad speculation. And honestly, it's not even something that I am willing to discuss because it is all conjecture. No one has ever said anything.
From an authoritative standpoint.
Yeah, and there's no proof of anything that anyone has said about her. So if you want to go ahead and look at the Reddit threads and whatever else there is on the internet, go for it. But rumors, I don't know, I just feel like it's not necessary to bring up because I don't actually know if any of it's true.
Right, and rumors that put people that may be totally innocent in a bad light.
Yeah.
Off of, you know, just pulling something out of your ass saying, I bet it was this person and they did this and then they made up the story about this person going there and whatever.
Yeah.
It's like you need to be able to, have some validity to your claims when trying to speculate.
Yeah.
And because speculation is an important part of unsolved cases.
Especially when they're older. Newer cases, like when people were speculating about the Idaho murders, like that is just let the police do their job. Stop trying to be a web sleuth, an armchair detective, and go after people who probably have nothing to do with this. Like there's someone getting sued for shit right now on that case.
Right. And
this is different.
And I understand what you're saying where like speculation is good in older cases, but I still think it has a place in newer cases within reason because it's one thing to speculate, okay, I bet this suspect, staked this person out and knew who they were targeting and it wasn't some random thing is very different than saying, I bet it was this person's father and because he's very suspicious and I have no reason to believe that, but that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Like when you're speculating generally, I think it's okay in newer cases, but when you're like pointing the finger like something's factually true, that's just
and hindering
bad
an
behavior.
investigation.
Right.
That's like the biggest thing. Like you do not want to be doing that.
You don't want to be perpetuating falsehoods,
yes.
But it's okay to ask questions.
Questions are good. Questions are very good. But anyway, there have also been numerous sightings of Craig that have come in over the years from people who believed they spotted him or someone that resembled him enough to warrant a call to authorities. 2 notable sightings were one in Montana, where someone believed Craig had been seen working at a Home Depot location, and another in San Diego, where he was seen by a clerk working at like this storefront that I think solely cashed checks. And they called into authorities to say they saw a man there cashing checks that matched Craig's description. What I found to be pretty wild about this sighting is that the call had come in not too long after Craig had vanished, but based on my research, I haven't been able to find much reporting from the early days, so the fact that this person knew Craig was missing was surprising to me.
Totally across the country.
Yeah, but I guess he had gone to San Diego before, I'm pretty sure. I don't know if it somehow made its way to reporting over there, and maybe something had been put out, but
I could see agencies or the private detective reaching out and saying, well, first learning from the family, are there any places that you have visited on vacation or any places that he's visited, throughout the country?
Yeah.
And then reaching out to those news agencies and saying, hey, we have a missing kid. We know that he had frequented this place on vacation or he had been there not too long ago. Do you mind just running a segment on him real quick and seeing if anybody hits on, his whereabouts?
Yeah, and that's another thing that, like, I probably wouldn't be able to find would be archives of things like that were just put on the 5 o'clock news or something just real quick, blasted across certain places that he would maybe potentially frequent. So there could have been things like that. But I just thought it was a little odd. Like right after he goes missing, someone across the country supposedly spots someone that looks like him. Yeah, but also, he has a very distinct look. We talked about that last week. So it's someone that like you would be like, oh my God, this could be him, Yeah,
and also a place cashing checks.
Yeah.
Is also a fair place I could see somebody that has ran away being, they got to get money somehow. Could they have had some random person write them a check? Did they steal somebody's checkbook and forge checks? All stuff like that. You got to get money somehow.
It's very true. Now, there were a few other sightings that came in over the years. One in particular in 2013 when someone provided a tip stating that they believed they saw Craig involved in a drug deal. Although it's kind of unclear where, but Veronica sent missing persons flyers to that area after hearing about it. And that was something that Veronica and her family did quite often, and that was travel to locations where these sightings came in, and she would always pass out flyers to hopefully garner new leads regarding the whereabouts of her son. And she's also put up billboards several times over the years in hopes that it would jog someone's memory or maybe prompt them to call in with a new lead. But all of these sightings that I've mentioned so far, none of them turned out to be Craig. From what I understand, obviously, it's been how long now, so...
Or maybe it could have been Craig, but by the time somebody gets there, by the time somebody figures it out, or, maybe whoever saw him is no longer willing to say anything, or who knows, I mean...
Overall, it seems like all the leads kind of went nowhere, pretty much. And this isn't really a witness statement or a sighting, but Veronica did travel to Seaside Heights, New Jersey, which was a vacation spot that the family went to every year. And she figured, like, she was thinking about amnesia. And, we talked about that with Judy Smith's case and how we thought that would be, like, a bigger problem.
That and quicksand.
Yeah, exactly. But she figured that if something like that had happened, that he might go to a place where he was comfortable or familiar with. And again, she passed out flyers. She searched everywhere around that area to try and find her son, but was unable to locate him. And Veronica also told the Times-Union in regards to providing tips to the family and police, quote, anything, regardless of how trivial or minute, just tell someone. Sometimes it's like trying to put a puzzle together, and those small pieces fit. Call the police. They can do it anonymously. They can drop me a note in my mailbox. They can send me a letter with no return address. If anybody has the slightest bit of information, just please share it, end quote. And I do also just want to mention that the Times-Union has done extensive reporting on this case, and one particular reporter, Pete Irizzo, I think is how you pronounce it, he's kept in contact with the family, and he would post an article every single year. And some years there were more articles than others, depending on what was going on in the case. But all in all, he always kept in touch with them, and it seemed as though he truly cared about keeping Craig's case in the public eye. Now, of course, as with many missing persons cases, psychics have come forward to the Frear family to provide their opinion. And of course, they're all very different opinions. Some say Craig is alive and living a new life somewhere, while others say he's deceased. Veronica did mention, though, that she's willing to talk to anyone and everyone regarding what could have happened to her son. All right, so now moving on to the searches that have taken place over the years. First and foremost, pretty much all of the searches that took place outside of that large community search that happened early on were organized by the state police and the family. And what's absolutely wild and also amazing is that they've conducted upwards of 68 searches in the area since Craig went missing.
Wow.
Right? And these searches weren't just foot searches with volunteers either. You had helicopters, bloodhounds, cadaver dogs, and dive teams all being used in different areas within Scotia and Glenville, New York. And based on how I understand it, they've done searches every year, plus additional throughout the years in other locations. But every single year they have searched the area where Craig was believed to have gone missing from. And during all of these searches, nothing has turned up. At least that's been reported publicly. Also, based on our conversation in last week's episode, John and I had noticed and pointed out that there were a few bodies of water along the path it's believed Craig took the day he went missing. But there is also the Mohawk River, which is a pretty large body of water, but it's to the east of where the Cambridge Manor apartment complex is. The Mohawk River does have a bridge that goes over it, and it has been speculated that maybe Craig went the opposite direction and could have jumped off the bridge into that body of water. But based on all of the statements regarding any of the sightings of Craig, he was on his way towards his home, which is in the complete opposite direction of the Mohawk River. Now, once 2013 came around, there was a fair amount of reporting regarding additional searches that were taking place in the area. And the first big one that came up was one from April of 2013. State police, the Frear family, and volunteers with the Northeast Mobile Search and Rescue Group were searching again, but this time was different because they were searching in a new location that had not been searched before. This time, the search was taking place behind the Price Chopper in Glenville, where Craig had worked. At the same time, authorities were also asking local residents from Glenville to Pattersonville to search their properties to see if they might be able to find anything that could lead them to where Craig might be. Now, fast forward to April of 2014, and there was yet another search taking place. Authorities did state publicly that this search was actually prompted by 2 leads that authorities had gotten the year prior when they'd done the search behind the Price Chopper. In regards to what those leads might have been, of course, as per usual, that was not released publicly, but there was this comment in the Times-Union, quote, Coppola would not go into detail about the new leads, but said they both pointed investigators to search an area of forest about 3.5 miles from where Frear went missing that had not been searched before, end quote. So this new search in 2014 was taking place near Maple Ave and Alplus Ave, I think maybe is how you pronounce it. I tried looking up a pronunciation. It's not an easy word, but those 2 streets, they intersect, and it's in Glenville. And John, I do actually have a map of the area pulled up here, and I mapped out how far this area is from the Cambridge Manor apartment complex as well, so you can see where they were searching, but also the distance between where he was last seen and now this new search.
All right. Okay, and why would they be searching in Maple Avenue area?
So that is apparently where they were prompted to search after they had searched behind the Price Chopper. They said they got 2 leads. They weren't going to tell you what those leads were, but this is where it led them to search a year later.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I mean, what would you gather from behind the price chopper that would then send you into this area? Now, when you look at the intersection of Maple Ave and Alplos Avenue, if that's how you pronounce it.
Again, I think that's a hard word. I don't think that shouldn't be a word.
Yeah,
what does it mean? Does it even mean anything?
Alplos? I don't know.
Alplos?
When I see ALP, I think alpaca.
Maybe it's Alplos.
Alplos Avenue. Yeah, I mean, there's a business over there. There's industrial handling services. Could they have found some type of work badge or something that would lead them over to this business because it's in the general area there?
I mean, maybe, but who knows if it existed back in 2004.
Yeah.
But they said they were searching a 3.5 mile area of woods, which, I mean, you see the woods that literally go along Maple Avenue there. So, I mean, maybe that's where they were searching. But I wonder if it had to do with maybe where someone lived, to go back to what you were talking about with the price chopper and people maybe not staying there or
and
leaving the job or something like that. And maybe it led them over to this area. I'm not sure.
It's also along train tracks, too.
Yeah, definitely. And you have to think, too, looking at this, I know we just kind of said, oh, Craig was last seen walking in the opposite direction, but the Mohawk River is right along this.
Yeah.
So then you have to think, going back to that whole conversation about the 2 kids and some people saying that they essentially lied about the whole thing. I mean, who even knows? Like, that's what I mean about this case. It's like at every turn, it can go either way.
Yeah. And then when you're talking about the body of water, could he have jumped off a bridge? He was in distress clearly on that phone call the day before he went missing.
There are just so many things that you wonder what's true. Like, what do the police have that's actual definitive fact?
Yeah, I agree. But just to kind of go against the idea that, like, this kid jumped off a bridge. Like, the Mohawk River is not this straight flowing body of water where it would bring you out to the ocean.
Yeah.
It's like this windy river that goes north, then east, then south. And, it's not like something that would be free flowing out to what you would think like a bigger body of water, where you think that if they did comb this river, they might come up with something. So,
yeah,
I don't know. Suicide is low on the totem pole for me as far as like what I think may have happened.
I agree. Yeah, I agree.
So back to Maple Ave and that search. Did anything come from that area?
Nothing was ever reported about that, but there was something interesting that I learned while I was researching this case, and I wonder if you know about it. So they were saying that the spring is one of the best times to do these searches, and I was noticing like April of every year they were doing these searches, and it has to do with the lack of foliage, the fact that everything's melting, so it's easier to see, things are thawing out, the cadaver dogs can smell better, and it was just interesting to me. Like, I'm learning all of this, and then there was reporting that was like, oh, well, this search was canceled because of a snowstorm. And I was like, what? But I guess people in the area were saying, this is not a storm. Like, you guys are ridiculous. It's like an inch of snow. Why aren't you searching? But I can also understand they want to make sure that the ground is completely, free of anything that could cover something that might not be able to be seen.
Right. You want to know that if you're using all these resources to conduct this search, that it's best case scenario. So if you can wait a little while, wait past the snowstorm.
Exactly, which is what they did, and it happened the following week, but I just don't know if they ever found anything.
Okay.
Now, knowing that there are all of these searches taking place has to be incredibly hard on a family dealing with a loss like this without any answers. The Times-Union reported the following comment regarding how Craig's mother felt during these times, and it really resonated with me, so I wanted to read it for you. It states, quote, "She sits at work in Albany while state police comb through tall grass and woods near where her son, Craig Frear, went missing on a summer day 10 years ago. It's hard for Veronica Frear to describe what these days are like, when new leads prompt investigators to spend a few days each year searching for signs of what happened to her son. She doesn't want them to stop looking, but she doesn't want them to find anything either. She still holds out hope that her son could be alive, that he didn't die in these woods. You go through a roller coaster of emotions. You hang on, hold on really tight. You're up, you're down, you're everywhere," Veronica Frear said. "As much as you want the answers, I'm afraid. I really don't want them. If anything, I'm scared. I just want this day to end." End quote.
Probably feels like that every day.
Honestly.
I just want this day to end.
And we talked about this before.
You're like living in a perpetual state of purgatory.
Yeah, and you just have no answers. And no matter what, regardless of if it's a missing person or a murder, it's the not knowing that's the worst. The unknown is just a cruel, cruel thing. All right, so police have publicly commented on many different scenarios over the years regarding what they believe could have happened to Craig. And one of the biggest sentiments brought up is that they do not believe Craig made it very far from the apartment complex before something happened to him, but they haven't 100% ruled out anything. The possibility of Craig having taken his own life or being involved in some sort of accident do seem unlikely because you would think that his body would have been found by now. But Gloria Coppola, the initial investigator who worked the case, did bring up the fact that she's seen cases where people have taken their own lives and their bodies weren't found for decades. But when thinking rationally, they do still appear to feel as though they would have found something if either of those two things had happened.
Right. I mean, with all of the searches that took place...
Are you reading my script?
No, I'm just saying, like, with all the resources used, all the manpower, you know, you have the neighborhood people doing it, you have helicopters and bloodhounds and stuff. Like, I don't think that this is one of those things where, you know, if he had taken his own life in that area, that they wouldn't have found him.
That's what I would think too. 68 searches.
That comment is something that's like, yeah, you know, I have seen things like this, but they barely ever happen. It's like, yeah, I've seen things too that, you know, hardly ever happen, but I've seen them happen.
Yeah,
like,
she was like your typical investigator where people were mentioning other things, and she's like, you can never rule anything out. It's 99.9% though that's not what happened. So it's always like she's one of those types of people that would keep in the back of her mind, it's still possible. It's all possible. But for the most part, it's not probable.
Yeah, right. Something that keeps popping into the back of my head, and I don't think we really went over in part one or this part, is what was Craig's home life like? How was his relationship with his family?
So from what I can tell, it seemed normal. He had a good relationship with his siblings. He seemed to have a good relationship with his parents. But yet again, that's another one of those things that people like to talk about online and just bring stuff up about him and his dad specifically and how they supposedly had this not so great relationship. But it goes back to the same thing that I just mentioned about the girlfriend, ex-girlfriend. And there's nothing to prove it. And specifically, Gloria Coppola was asked about this because she was interviewed for WNYT when they did the segment in 2021. And she was like, 99.9%, he did not have anything to do with his son's disappearance. Yeah. Leave the man alone.
Okay.
So she said, like, she knows all the stuff that people have talked about, all the rumors, all this, all that. At the end of the day, we know nothing. Compared to what police know. We know nothing compared to what the family knows, and that's not anything that anyone should be talking about on a web sleuth's thread when you know nothing about it.
Right, so just in the same vein of, you know, people taking the sighting of Craig being with the girlfriend, ex-girlfriend at the Cambridge Manor Apartments and being like, oh, she must have had something to do with it. They're also taking the dad being in that same general area around that time as, oh, he was there, he must have did something.
That's what it seems like, and it's like, how
without
can you know?
Without any factual basis to really build off of.
Of course, and how can you know exactly what goes on in anyone's home? You really can't, and people can put out any sort of facade that they want. And sure, things could have been bad, things could have been awesome, and people misconstrue certain signs, if you will. You know, they'll say, oh, well, he and his dad were acting weird at this time, and I think that there's something going on between them, and, you know, the dad must hate that the son's doing this or whatever. Like, people just make stuff up, and unless you have definitive proof to say that there was anything going on there, let the investigators do their job. They've put out that they are nearly 100% certain that the father has literally nothing to do with this. Then that should be good enough. You, as the web sleuth and the armchair detective, know nothing more than they know, and you just having your opinion and spewing that online is not helpful.
Right, I agree with that. I think that if people are coming forward and trying to make a claim about someone, they need to have, you know, verifiable facts or at least some type of sighting where, you know, if his dad was this overbearing father where if he didn't succeed, he would, you know, pull him aside and slap him upside the head and abuse him that way, even publicly. Like, he was such a, again, to use an overbearing father that he couldn't even hide it when he was out in public. Like, those are the things that you would need to have multiple people coming forward, and then those are the things that investigators would take forward and then suss out and, you know, work off that. But if they're coming forward and saying that he has been cleared up to 99.9%, not being involved in this. Mm-hmm. I mean, I think that's fairly high chance. And it's also, years and years later now, where if they did have some type of idea where he may have been involved, I'm sure they would have hit on that pretty heavily going forward, because it seems as though they don't really have a lot of suspects in mind. So if they had, something to work off of there, you'd think that they would go on it pretty heavily. But if they've ruled it out,
they've ruled it out. And it just makes me think back to Alicia Markovich's case. And like how her father had put out all these bizarre statements to the media and all of that.
Was it like she was going to show up with a chic in like a
Lincoln rich Swami
Continental or something?
Yeah, it was like just these ridiculous comments that everyone was looking at like, this is weird. Then he's uncooperative with things. His story's strange from when she's last seen, and none of it makes sense. And that's where, you actually have definitive proof. It's reported in the media, direct comments from the guy. Right. That's different, where in this situation, it's just like people are like, oh, yeah, I heard that they had a bad home life.
People are trying to create a villain.
You heard?
Right.
Did you see?
Right.
Do you know? So it's those types of things where it's like, I don't even want to give any sort of fuel to that fire. I think those are people who just honestly have nothing better to do and just want to like
start rumors.
Yeah, start rumors and find different ways to like try and crack this case, even though it's like, look at the facts, and that's probably what'll help you crack the case if that's what you are so determined to do in your chair at home behind your computer screen.
Yeah.
But, anywho, long tangent there. But I wanted to touch on, too, the possibility, if police thought that Craig could have run away and started this new life. And that's yet another theory that authorities find to be particularly unlikely, specifically because Craig had almost nothing on him when he vanished. And regarding this theory, Gloria Coppola told the Times-Union that Craig, quote, did not have any means to start a life undetected, end quote. And kind of in conjunction with that, you'd think that there would have been a good reason why Craig would want to leave. And one that obviously comes to mind is a possible problem Craig had with another person or group of people. But, even though we've been talking about this, the potential for sexuality or the potential for maybe getting into drugs or some other sort of problem, investigators said that they haven't been able to locate one single person or a group of people or anything that Craig might have had any like big issues with that would then prompt him to want to run away.
I don't know. I mean, the more you talk about it, it seems like investigators are ruling out every possibility and not really coming forward with what the possibility is that could have happened.
They think foul play.
Interesting.
Now, I want to fast forward to November of 2014, about 7 months after that last search that was conducted near Maple Ave. And this is when the anxiety-inducing news that a badly decomposed body had been located in a culvert that runs under a bridge on Freeman's Bridge Road in the Glenville area. The remains were said to be too decomposed to even determine the deceased individual's gender, so the not knowing had to be even more intense for the Frear family. An autopsy was scheduled for the day after the body was found, but of course, as with like everything in all of these cases, that was postponed by a day, and the family had to wait several days in total to find out if the body found was their son. During the excruciating few days of waiting, Bill Frear, Craig's father, stated, quote, because of the location and everything, immediately you're thinking, oh my God, it might be him. It's the same thing all over again. It's very hard to describe. It's not like you're getting your hopes up because you're dreading it's him, end quote. But just several days after the body was located, on Friday, November 7th, 2014, the Frear family and the public were made aware that the body located in the culvert was not Craig's. Instead, it was a 63-year-old man who authorities stated appeared to have died roughly 8 months earlier. But due to the level of decomposition, there was no way to confirm the man's cause of death. However, it did appear to be deemed that foul play was not suspected. A few years later, in 2019, the Candles for Craig Frear event was created, and on every anniversary of his disappearance, the family would ask people to light a candle to honor Craig, take a picture, and post it to their Facebook page about Craig's case. And while we're on the topic, if you wanted to take a minute to join the Facebook page, it hasn't been super active recently, but I think, if you want to know more about this case or see a lot of things that people are talking about, definitely go give that page a follow. It's called Finding Craig Frear, and I'll have a link to it in the show notes and on our website. Now, come 2021, after years without new information being released in the case, there's what I consider to be a pretty big development. So at this point, it was reported that there was a sighting of Craig that authorities were looking into, and they wanted the public to come forward if they knew anything about this sighting to then, try and help them validate it. And the story regarding the sighting is pretty straightforward, but How and when it came to authorities' attention is where it gets a little confusing. But apparently, a previous coworker of Craig's, this guy named Nick, said he had seen him sometime after Craig had already gone missing. Based on the reporting regarding this new sighting, it is completely unclear when this witness came forward to tell authorities that he'd seen Craig. It honestly could have been back in 2004, could have been sometime in between, or could have been more recently. I truly have no idea, and that's what's so frustrating about it. It was, however, mentioned that this information was essentially held onto for a little bit to be released on the anniversary of Craig's disappearance. But again, we don't know the circumstances surrounding when it came in. It's possible they held onto it for a while or not very long, but I would personally find it negligible for them to hold onto it for 17 years, but that's just my 2 cents.
Yeah.
Which kind of makes me wonder, John, do you think that would be something you'd ask the public's help with almost 2 decades later? Or would you think that that would be something authorities should put out as soon as they hear about it so they can attempt to verify it?
I feel like first things first, you have this person coming forward. You would want to try and verify it.
Yes.
You would want as much information from this person as possible. You would want to know, what did he look like? What was he wearing? What did his, physical well-being look like?
Yeah.
How long after his disappearance did you see him? Where did you see him? There are a lot of questions that I would have there.
Well, I'll answer most of those for you in a minute, but I'm just curious if you think, like, if there's a sighting that comes up and you have this last sighting with these 2 kids, if there's supposedly another one after he's already been reported missing.
I don't know. If you already have the word out that this kid is missing and a fair amount of time later, you get this information that somebody just saw him recently after he's been missing for an extended period of time. I don't necessarily think that you have to put it out to everyone. I guess I could see why you would want to, because if he's still in the area, now you're refreshing people's memories and you're saying, hey, he was just seen here. It's like if you have a suspect for a crime, right?
Yeah.
It's like, oh, we just saw him here. Everybody be on the lookout and keep your eyes peeled for him. But also, I mean, that may get to Craig, and if Craig's trying to lay low and not be seen, that may make him flee.
Yeah, that's true too.
So you have to look at it in a couple different ways. Do you want to alert everyone, including Craig, that you know that he's around, if he is? Or do you want to just blast it out to everyone and everybody's looking for the kid now?
Yeah, and the other thing too about that is state police didn't get involved for 18 months. So even if this Nick guy came forward within the first year, who was he coming forward to? The PI? The
You
Scotia
hope so,
PD?
because he was doing something outside of the Scotia PD?
Yeah, so it's like, could it have been totally lost in translation? And then maybe it was something like, as investigators are relooking at the case, they're now doing this new segment or whatever with WNYT, all this, like, is that coming out now? And they're like, oh, maybe we should bring up this sighting now.
Yeah.
And talk about it at this point. But let's get into the sighting and what this Nick guy said. So he said that he saw Craig in the passenger seat of a car that was heading north on State Route 50 in Glenville, which, if you remember, State Route 50 is the same road the Price Chopper was located on. This witness saw the car stopped at a traffic light on State Route 50 at the intersection with Sheffield Road. And when the light turned green, the car turned left onto Sheffield Road. And John, I do have a map of this area that I'll send to you so you can take a peek at it while I continue to give the rest of the info about the sighting. So Nick then claims that Craig even looked at him for a quick second before the car he was in turned. But yet another frustrating thing about this sighting is that this witness said he does not remember the exact date of when he saw Craig, but he believes it was between June 27th and July 2nd of 2004. He stated that the sighting was definitely not prior to the 27th because he did not know Craig was missing at the time, but he said that everyone else at work at the Price Chopper knew that he was. So then Nick, I guess, realizes what's going on after he got to work, and he hears about the fact that Craig was missing, and now he's like, wait, what? How is that possible? I literally just saw him in this car at the red light. And this whole piece to the puzzle is just yet another thing that makes me think this sighting could have possibly come in much earlier on in this case, because why would he not come forward after he found out that Craig was missing And he also willingly went on camera and spoke with the reporters for WNYT. So why would he, have just waited 17 years or whatever it was at the time to come forward and then be like, yeah, I'm just going to tell the world that I was right. quiet for so long. Here's my first and last name and exactly who I am
right.
on the news for everyone to see,
Yeah, I don't know. I think that it could have been a good sighting. When mapping it out, it's less than 3 miles from Craig's house.
Yeah.
So I don't know if this is important at all, but there is a Schenectady County airport. I don't know if that's a private airport.
Oh, yeah,
nearby,
I
or
don't know.
If, somebody could have flown out of there. But.
I think John just wanted to say Schenectady because he can say it better than I can.
No, but I mean...
Well, there's a little more. Hold on.
Okay.
So this Nick guy said that if he knew Craig was missing, he would have tried to follow where he was going.
Mm-hmm.
And you might be wondering if Nick was able to provide any information about what the car looked like.
I was going to ask the driver.
Yeah, but unfortunately he couldn't provide any specifics, at least about the car, which at first I was like, oh, that's so unfortunate. But then if you think about it, like he didn't know Craig was missing. Why would he be scrutinizing what this car looked like or what the driver looked like or anything like that? He probably just recognized like, hey, that's Craig.
Yeah, exactly.
So, that makes sense to me.
Mm-hmm.
And I did just want to mention the area where Sheffield Road is. So as of today, it doesn't appear as though there are any stoplights that turn onto Sheffield Road. But I mean, due to changing infrastructure over the years, that could have been different in 2004. But what I find to be the most peculiar about this sighting, if it's true, is that if this is the road Craig and the driver of that car turned onto, that is such a residential area. There don't appear to be any other main roads that they could easily get to. So it kind of makes me wonder, if this was actually Craig, was he like going to someone's house that lived over there?
Yeah.
Is there way more to this story that still hasn't been uncovered yet based on this sighting alone? Well, I mean, I feel like it poses a lot of new questions.
Again, I assume a lot of times, like if investigators have this information that we have, which is all publicly available, that they have looked into this stuff. But like if you turn left...
Well, they're asking though. They're asking the public, do you know anything about this sighting? Did you see him in this area?
Right, but what I'm saying is if they know that he was allegedly seen turning left onto Sheffield Road with somebody driving, then you would look into, okay, was there anybody that worked at Price Chopper that had that address? Were there any trucking agencies that employed somebody that was living in this area and stuff like that? Like those are the leads that you would hopefully work after you get that information.
Yeah.
But back to what you were saying as far as Sheffield Road goes, like, yeah, it is residential. Like you take a left onto Sheffield Road and you're not going to get out onto another main road, really, unless you go through...
multiple other side streets.
Right, like extensive neighborhoods. Like you would either have to go back out onto Route 50, State Route 50, or work your way all the way west to, Swaggertown Road, which looks like another relatively main road.
Yeah.
Like it's all just a little grid pattern of neighborhoods.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's odd.
It's definitely odd, and I just would implore our listeners, if you know anything about this, to reach out to authorities because they are hoping to get more information about this sighting to attempt to validate it.
Yeah, it seems odd. I mean, it's in the general ballpark of when he went missing.
Yeah.
Would he have been with someone going to their house and then from there plan to leave? I don't know. I had a general idea written down as far as like how you were saying earlier. He had nothing with him or no means of running away because he had no money, he had no nothing. But I'll hold it and get into it when we talk about theories. But if he's with somebody and he's going to somebody's house, could they be helping facilitate his exit?
Yeah, so I think that's why, for me, when I was saying about this whole sighting, if it's true, I feel like it's posing a lot of new questions for me, and there's a lot to uncover there if it's accurate. And I feel like just noticing Sheffield Road and that whole area in particular was one of the things that made me wonder about that. And for a while, I just was pretty convinced that him being able to leave wasn't really an option, but that kind of changed things for me a little bit, especially like after Hoagie and that whole thing that happened. But before we move on to the theories in this case, I do just want to bring up something that I think is very important when it comes to solving this case. And it's something that's so reminiscent of what Detective Godino and Detective Haswell told us when we interviewed them about Simone Reidinger's case. So in this WNYT Cold Case 13 segment on Craig's case, the reporter brought up something that state police want the public and anyone who may know something about Craig or his whereabouts to know.
State police do want to put out a call to anyone who might know anything about this case to please reach out and contact him. They did say that they're afraid some people who may have known Craig that weren't aware to his family, that they may be concerned that they'll somehow implicate themselves if they've done something that wasn't right. They're saying, you know what, we're not about trying to get someone else in trouble. We just want information. So pick up the phone. There's an anonymous tip line.
All right. So with that, we can finally get to the theories. And I don't know, John, if you want to bring up your theory now or if you want to work through them in the order that I have here.
Let's work through them in the order that you have them, and I'll harp on the ones that I agree with, that I disagree with, that I think should be looked into a little bit further, or whatever.
Okay, so the first two are essentially the ones that we already kind of discounted, and that's the possibility of suicide or some sort of accident. And I think we already touched on why that just doesn't seem realistic, specifically because Craig has never been found.
Right, and I think we talked about that in Hoagie's case, too, where it's like, if you end up killing yourself, that body ain't moving.
Nope.
So if you wanted to not be found, you would have to do it in some extremely remote location that nobody would ever happen upon you, or in an area where once you were dead, the elements could either hide you or take you away or something like that. So that I think is not
pretty
feasible.
Low on...
Unless he did that, like, after leaving the area.
Yes.
And he's in Wyoming because it's your favorite state to name.
Sorry, Wyoming.
But it's just, if he's out in the middle of nowhere and did it,
yeah,
that's different. But when all of these searches are happening in the area where he was last seen, I just think it's very unlikely.
I agree. So then that brings us to...
I think an accident is kind of in the same vein, though.
Yeah,
because
that's what
if he's like running in the woods to get home and he didn't hear a train coming and he got hit by a train, which we know didn't happen because there was no evidence of that, or, some other type of accident happened, then he really wouldn't be trying to hide himself. Whatever would have happened, and within all of these searches, something would have been found.
Yeah, so this was something, the whole accident thing, that kind of brings me to, I guess, another sort of theory, but it's kind of in the same vein with Charlie Allen.
Okay.
So a lot of people speculated the fact that like maybe he had a mental break and he ran into the woods and the elements essentially are what took his life and no one's ever been able to find him. That's one of the theories. But people have like brought that up in regards to Craig's case, but it was June.
Right.
The elements aren't coming for months.
He wasn't seen climbing into a window in just like a t-shirt or just shorts or whatever it was for Charlie Allen.
Yeah, in like October, November in
like
Massachusetts. Like it's freezing here, so.
But funny enough, you mentioned Charlie Allen. Obviously, I don't think like the mental break portion of it, which could have been a factor in his case, would be a factor in this one. But there was the sighting where Charlie Allen was seen at a truck stop.
Yes.
Getting in a truck with a trucker, like a long haul trucker. If Craig made friends with these truckers and maybe they didn't just work on a short route where they delivered dairy to
grocery stores.
Yeah. There's a possibility that somebody with, their work habits and availability to travel long distances could have very well said, "Oh, you want to get out of here? Yeah, I know you. You're cool. Like, I understand what's going on. I'll bring you."
Yeah.
That's a possibility. I don't think that that's really what I was going for. But just the connection with Charlie Allen's case, with the sighting of seeing him at the truck stop, getting into a, like a Mack truck or something like that.
Yeah.
Kind of link up to this case with Craig making friends with the truckers at his place of work.
Yeah. So I mean, I guess that kind of brings us to the next theory then, which is, could he have run away from his life?
All right. So this is more along the lines of what I wanted to touch on earlier, but I kind of kept quiet about, is I understand where people are coming forward and they're saying that he didn't really have the means to run away on his own. He had no money, he had no belongings, he had no whatever. But that doesn't mean that he didn't have somebody to assist him, somebody willing to help.
Yes.
And if somebody was willing to help him, then the idea of him not having anything available to him totally goes out the window. So I think that is still a very good possibility.
I think that's fair to believe.
And, if you had some type of relationship built between Craig and somebody that traveled frequently for work or did a truck route where they were in this area for a little while and then they went to another area later on. I mean, he could have just hitched a ride with them, or if he built a friendship or a relationship with them, that could have been totally possible. And after covering Hoagie's case and me really believing that there was no foul play there, that it seemed as though he had left, it didn't really seem like he took anything either.
Yeah, so that's, I think...
And he was living right down the fucking street practically from where he used to live.
I know, and that's the case that now I go back to all the time because
possible.
I used to always think it's not possible, but it was like 2013 or whatever with him, and I'm like, if he could do it in 2013, someone could do it in 2004.
Right, he was like, what, 2 states over?
Yeah.
So, I mean, I don't know.
So it never seemed possible or probable until that case was solved.
And we're not talking 99.9% improbable. We're talking like now every time that somebody hasn't been found and we don't think foul play is necessarily totally, the main focus.
Yeah.
And we don't think it was an accident. We don't think it was suicide. It's like, all right, well, I know this guy that ran away in 2013 that lived literally 2 states away. And nobody friggin' knew anything for a decade.
Yeah, like how did no one watch the Disappeared episode that lived in that town? He looked exactly the same. These are the things that I can't get out of my head.
Right, and you go through bigger physical changes over the course of almost 10 years, going from 17 years old to 27 years old, than you do from going like from a middle-aged man to, an older middle-aged man. You know what I mean?
Exactly, yeah.
So
that's the thing that's tough. And like, I go back to the whole situation with losing his license. Did he really lose his license, or did he hide his license and he was using it for something else? And making friends with the trucker, that makes sense too. And I had talked about this last episode, and I asked you, John, was there anything bad enough going on in your life that you would want to run away? And you said no, but you had a multitude of reasons for why. But again, I just think about why Craig would have wanted to do that. Was this that detrimental to his life that he was like, nope, I don't want to be around? He did have everything going for him. He was going to get into college. He had already been scouted. He was only a junior. Not even into his senior year yet. He was going to be captain the following year. He had a lot of good things going for him.
I understand that, but those are good things going for him on the surface.
Yeah.
And if, you're looking at it from the outside looking in, it's like, oh yeah, this kid had everything going for him, yet if it wasn't what he wanted, if it wasn't true to himself, and he felt that he was living a lie and that he couldn't be truthful and that he couldn't be himself in whatever world had been built for him in, those 17 years or whatever, up until his disappearance, it's like, okay, I can't be true to myself here. And this person may know something about me that's going to, totally bring my world crashing down around me.
Yeah.
Even though that may not have happened. I'm just going to go.
Yeah. I mean,
I'll start fresh somewhere else.
Yeah. So I think it's fair to believe that it is still possible that he could have left his life behind. But one of the things that really gets me is that his dad passed away in 2017 and he still didn't come back. So, when you see or that your family is like doing all these things, your mom's struggling with her health because Veronica had mentioned that she was going through treatment, and his dad passed away. His siblings are getting married. They're having kids. So he's got all these nieces and nephews he knows nothing about. So for 17, almost 19 years now, to know all of these things have happened, not coming back.
I mean, I think if you have gotten to the point where you make the decision, it's like, hey, I'm going to leave. You may make the choice to have everything else be out of sight, out of mind. I'm not going to look into this because I don't want to know. And the easiest way for me to get away is to not know what's going on. Yeah. Because, again, to go back to Hoagie's case, his son was being ran through the ringer about being accused for killing his father or having something to do with his death. And he never cared enough to come back and say, hey, my son had nothing to do with murdering me or my death. I'm literally living 2 states away in New York. And, hi, I'm here. So,
but everyone's different.
I get everyone's different, but now seeing a case that we covered and knowing that something like that can be done in a modern era, like 2010 and on, now I don't rule things out.
So, yes, I'll agree
I think
that
it's still
possible.
A possibility.
Yeah, so then that brings us to the last theory, which is that Craig met with foul play.
Which I understand investigators may be leaning on that because, they may be thinking like I thought before we covered Hoagie, where, somebody can't run away in a modern era where nobody would ever know anything about them.
Yeah, and that's the thing. It's always so interesting to me when they say, oh, well, their social security number and all these things haven't been used. Well, of course not. if you're trying to run away from your life, you're not going to use those things. You're not
Let me
going
open a credit card after I just tried to run away.
Yeah, you're going to change your name. You're going to do all these things. So I get that.
Work for cash. Things like that.
But there are just so many, I don't know, there are so many different things where I feel like I could go either way. The fact that authorities obviously know so much more than we do, and they are putting more stock into foul play, makes me wonder what they know.
From your investigation into the Hoagie case, where were authorities leaning on that one?
I don't remember. I feel like they mentioned foul play, but they also were like, I don't really know. But these detectives have said that they don't think he got very far. They think something happened either along that path or he maybe encountered someone or something like that.
I just wish we knew a little bit more.
You know what I want to know more about? Was Craig's car.
Yeah.
That was something that has never really been talked about. What did they find in it? Like, even if they found a receipt or something, you know, was there something weird in the car? And also, why was the car parked in another parking lot at the apartment complex? That's yet another reason where I'm like, okay, maybe this could go along the lines of him wanting to leave. So I don't know. I mean, I think foul play or him running away are the two possibilities.
Okay, but based on all the information that's put out publicly that you've been able to compile and put into this episode, I would totally bet on him running away because there is nothing that they have put out to make me believe that he was in hot water with somebody. Somebody had it out for him. Somebody was going after him. So outside of the chance of him just meeting somebody along the way that ended up killing him, what evidence has been put out publicly over the course of almost 2 decades now that makes you believe that foul play is afoot? There's really nothing out there. There was more out there saying that, you know, he had problems at work. He stopped going to work. He didn't tell anybody about not working there anymore. He started hanging out with his other friend group. The phone call.
I was just going to bring up the phone call, but the phone call could go either way, I think. The phone call could be him freaking out and being like, holy shit, I don't want this to get out and wanting to leave. Or it could be, this person's threatening to hurt me and I'm afraid for my life. And then unfortunately, the next day, it's just this coincidence that he winds up with this person or around this person and this bad thing happens.
I get it, but the things that I wrote down that like lead me to believe that there's a potential that he could have ran away was you had the phone call at that graduation party the day before he went missing.
Yeah.
Where supposedly he was like, oh no, I can't believe you're going to do this, like whatever, seeming like somebody was going to come forward and give information that, you know, put him in a bad light or got him in trouble or whatever.
Yeah.
He stopped going to work. He was avoiding his friends, his main group of friends. He was avoiding his soccer teammates. And there were 68 searches, roughly, covering most of the area where he would have been. Like, you're telling me that whatever happened as far as foul play, like, nothing big was found in all of those searches when you have bloodhounds, you have helicopters, you have the neighborhood people, the public, all these people looking into it. What evidence do you have that leads you to foul play?
Well, okay, so I completely agree with you. I feel like I never want to believe that someone could have run away, because I feel like it's just this shitty thing and it sucks any which way you look at it.
Right.
But then I think back to the 2 searches that were done in 2013 and 2014. And so they're searching behind the price chopper. And then supposedly they get these 2 leads that then send them over to this heavily wooded area near a certain street. What kind of leads would you have to make you search over there? Why would you be searching in a wooded area unless you think that there could be a body there? I don't know enough definitive facts about this case to really give an answer, I think. I think it's possible. It seems more possible that he could have run away, but that's just based on what's been released publicly. I feel like if I knew more, and if there were things that authorities were willing to put out publicly that could lead you in the other direction, then I might be pushed more towards foul play. But I think there are too many questions in this case for me where I don't know what's accurate, what's definitive, and I go back to this all the frickin' time, but I wish these authorities would be like the ones who worked on Gary Grant Jr.'s case and say, here are the facts that we know 100% almost 20 years later.
Right.
This, and this, and then you can take that and be like, all right, let's get all the rest of this noise out of here and let's focus on what we know and go from there.
Yeah.
So I just think for me personally, I just do not know enough definitively to go either way.
I think that if I had to put a feather in my cap on one or the other, I would have to say that he left, ran away, or left with someone. Because, again, even though we don't know everything, we know enough to assume that he was uncomfortable in the life that he was living. Not that he was scared in the life that he was living. He appeared to be uncomfortable. I would need authorities to release more information to help me believe or lean towards the idea that foul play happened.
Yeah, I totally see where you're coming from on that one. And I think this is one where we're definitely kind of landing in two different places where you feel like you can kind of hang your hat on one thing. And I feel like I have too many questions. And I also feel like that doesn't happen very often with us.
No, usually we kind of come to common ground and meet in the middle.
Yeah, I just think, I don't know. I've been struggling with this one since the day that I began researching it. You know, are certain things red herrings? Like his mom even said, you know, am I thinking too much about this? Yeah. Is this something that wasn't really a red flag? It was just him being a teenager. And, you know, how many people are actually being truthful about what they saw or what they heard? There's no definitive proof to say Craig was seen on video camera here. Yeah. It was these kids said that they saw him, but then maybe they didn't. I don't really know. There's a lot of rumors about that. And then, oh, well, this person said he saw him in this car driving down onto this street. Oh, but there's no video proof or he didn't have a cell phone for location tracking, things like that. And
nobody's corroborating that. Like no neighbor saw him getting out of the car once he stopped on Sheffield Road or something like that.
Yeah, it's like the one girlfriend, ex-girlfriend, you know, you have proof that he was there because Veronica got him on the phone there. So you know that one's accurate because he picked up the phone, he talked to his mother. You have the girlfriend's mother, and Veronica all saying he's been in this apartment.
As far as we know, that is the last known location of him, last certified known location of him.
Exactly. And then you have all these other little sightings or little things that people have said over the years where nobody else has said, or you know, there's no other sort of proof to say, yes, this is accurate. Yes, he was seen here. Yes, he was in this location. And I think that's what's getting me. If there was something where he was on video, or if he, you know, went and took out money at a bank, or he did something, like with Hoagie even, he was seen at the gas station.
I agree. I wonder what our listeners think, because
this is one that I absolutely want to hear your opinions on. I mean, I want to hear your opinions on everything. You know, right. I like to have these conversations, but this has probably been, and I said this with Hoagie too, and then it turned out to be this wild ride. But this is one of the ones that has absolutely freaking stumped me.
Yeah.
Totally stumped me.
Agreed.
Craig Frear has been missing for almost 19 years, and his family has absolutely no answers as to what happened to him. The unknown has impacted them immensely, and for years, Veronica left Craig's room in its exact same state he left it in, with her even leaving his laundry in the hamper. And she would buy him Christmas gifts every year in case he came home. Veronica had taken her pain and turned it into good, though, and at one point had been working with the police regarding how to handle a missing persons case. The Times-Union reported, quote, "She also now helps the police train new officers in how to deal with families who are missing loved ones. She wants everyone to understand that even as leads dry up, the missing don't simply fade from their loved ones' lives, even if they do from public consciousness. They remain more than just a photo on a poster or by the dinner table," end quote. Losing their son had an intense impact on Veronica and Bill, and unfortunately, their marriage didn't make it, and they ended up getting divorced after over 28 years together. Bill later passed away in 2017 without any answers as to what happened to his son. Craig's siblings have grown up and gone on to get married and have children of their own, and Craig has missed all of that, and his family just misses him desperately. They deserve to know what happened all those years ago, and there has to be someone out there that knows more that can help bring those answers to light. As Veronica stated, quote, "I strongly believe there is somebody out there who knows what happened to my son. I believe that keeping it out there, keeping the case alive, it's kind of my only chance at this point. I'm on my knees, hoping there's someone out there who can help us." There's currently a $10,000 reward for information that leads to finding Craig. When he was last seen, he was wearing blue jeans, a short-sleeve white t-shirt, white Adidas sneakers with 3 black stripes, as well as a gold necklace with a St. Christopher medal on it. If you know anything about what happened to Craig Frear back in June of 2004 or know of his whereabouts, please contact the New York State Police at 518-630-1037. 888-1700 or the New York State Police Anonymous Tip Line at 1-800-448-3847. Thank you all so much for tuning in every week. We're so happy to have you here. Make sure to leave us a 5-star review before you go and follow us on our socials.
You can follow us on Instagram at WickedDeedsPod and on Twitter at WickedDeeds. Don't forget to visit our website, wickeddeedspodcast.com, to take a look at any photos from this episode and view our source material.
But most importantly, tune in next week for an all-new episode.